Chapter 5 is called The Ark Project. David was unsure exactly what he expected to find as he entered the building, but it certainly wasn't the sight that greeted him. To outward appearances, the tiny building may have seemed old and abandoned, but held within was a secret hub of activity which had stunned David into silence. The first thing that he noticed was the back wall. Mounted along the dusty stonework were 3 notice boards. The notice board in the middle was the biggest of the 3, and across its surface was spread a huge Ordnance Survey map. Squinting and recognising many of the marked buildings and landmarks, David realised it was a map of the whole town. On the notice boards to each side of the map were a series of photographs. Each photo seemed to be of a different person. Some were close-ups, and others clearly taken from afar. The subjects of the photographs were seemingly unaware that they were having their pictures taken, with most being snapped doing things like supermarket shopping or entering their car. It was far more difficult to identify any of the people profiled in the photographs to the right of the map, as a large red cross obscured each of the 4 pictures. The 2 photographs to the left of the map, though, David was able to identify instantly. The man pictured lounging along a park bench with a flask and a sandwich was unmistakably Mr. Torrance. The second photograph showed a small middle-aged woman wearing an apron and standing behind a counter was Edna Fleck, the town's baker. Dominating most of the main room was a large oak table surrounded by half a dozen chairs, and seated at the far end was Trevor, who was so busy writing in a notebook that he didn't even raise his head upon David and Kazima's arrival. "David, please take a seat," motioned Kazima, sitting herself down next to Trevor, who at this point finally put down his pen and offered a weak smile to David. "Believe it or not, we've been planning this meeting with you for quite some time. You see, we believe that you are in a unique position to help us with something very important. As unfortunate and idiotic as your intervention with Mr. Torrance was, I suppose it at least proves that you're not lacking in courage." David began to squirm in his seat. The word courage was making him feel very uncomfortable. What exactly was Kazima expecting him to do? Flashbacks of the morning's events came flooding back. Would he be asked to do something as foolish as Kazima had previously attempted? "Look, I really don't want to get myself into any trouble," he pleaded. "My parents have enough going on without an outlaw for a son to worry about. Please, just let me go home." "What we do here is not without purpose," Kazima began to explain. "Everything we do is thoroughly planned and prepared for. It's not about self-sacrifice or rebellious pranks just for the sake of it. We're standing up for what is right. We call ourselves the ARK Project. It's an acronym. Adults to respect children. We pick out grown-ups that give kids a raw deal, ones that think it's okay to abuse their power to make our lives a misery. We work together to take action that makes them think again." David paused to process what Kazima was telling him. "Right, I get it, and I understand why you would want to target Mr. Torrance," David eventually said. "But what exactly were you hoping to achieve by throwing a pencil at his bottom? Surely that would make him even worse." "Possibly," Kazima conceded. "But this was only meant to be the beginning of what we had in store for him. We wanted Mr. Torrance to get a taste of the humiliation he so casually inflicts on others. Imagine how he would have felt when he realised what had happened, then seeing the room full of laughing children who had been responsible for his fate. Sure, there would have been punishments, but then would have come phase 2, phase 3. We would keep targeting him one way or another until he began to give the pupils the respect we deserve." Kazima stood up and walked towards the window at the far end side of the room. On the sill sat 3 egg cups, each holding an old wrinkled peach. The peaches were covered with a series of black holes, and the one in the centre had a pencil sticking out of it. As you can see, a lot of practice went into this morning. We don't leave things to chance. "So, Mr. Torrance was more of a long-term target," David said. "This is starting to make a little bit more sense. So what have you two got planned for him next?" It's not just the two of us in the ARC project. There are more, said Kazima. Each of us has our own important role to play. Trevor, who you no doubt already know, is our surveillance expert. He's the one who got us the map, and we rely on him for plotting and monitoring the movement of our targets. Something which is essential for the planning of many of our events. These photographs were taken and printed by Trevor too. My dad works for the local paper, said Trevor. He got me into photography. I've even got my own darkroom through there. Trevor gestured towards a small side door on the right-hand side wall. Trevor's dad owns this place, explained Kazima. He lives in the cottage next door, with Mr. Jessup staying in the big farmhouse further up the track. The children suddenly stopped talking as they heard somebody fumbling with the combination lock outside. A few moments later, the door slowly creaked open, with Chris awkwardly pushing it with his shoulder. Both arms were being pulled behind his back. With one hand, he led a girl with pigtails and glasses into the room. Compared to Chris, she was tiny. David reckoned her to only be 5 or 6 years old. With his other hand, Chris dragged a bulldog who seemed very reluctant to be moved anywhere. When Chris finally got the dog into the room, it instantly slumped down on a bed of cushions that had been propped up against the wall. By this time, the little girl had already made her way over to one of the free seats and was emptying the contents of her green backpack onto the table. She neatly arranged her felt pens, colouring book, and banana, taking no notice of anybody else in the room. I'm sorry we're late, said Chris, grabbing himself a seat too. There's something up with Brutus. He wasn't up for walking anywhere this afternoon. Ah, David, I'm so glad you made it. It's great to see you. He put a hand on David's shoulder. For the first time, David was beginning to feel properly welcome. We really must press on now that everybody's here, Kazima asserted. David, you were asking what was going to be next in store for Mr. Torrance. The truth of the matter is there is nothing else planned for him. For now. You'll have no doubt noticed his photo remains on our target board. His time will come very soon, however. Draw your attention instead to the photograph next to him. A lady you will recognise as our local baker, Edna Fleck. We need your help to gather resources to enable us to carry out our next planned mission. There should be no great risk in your role. Will you help us? The children waited for David's response. David sensed that Kazima still resented him for interfering with the plot against Mr. Torrance. And had it just been her alone asking David to agree to this, he would have probably suspected hidden dangers and complications and politely declined. With Chris and Trevor both nodding encouragingly at him, though, David felt a little bit more at ease. They were essentially telling him that it was all going to be okay. All right, David agreed. I'll help out. Good choice, said Kazima. And just before we share a little bit more about our target and what we have in store for her, we have one more small matter to address. Your name. You see, to ensure that the ARC project has the best possible chance of success, it's important that it operates in secrecy and that the identity of its members is not compromised. Each of us has a code name, so that if our communications or plans ever become intercepted, the damage done would be minimal. I use the name Shikra, which is a small hawk found in my home country of Somalia. It might seem small and unassuming, but it can strike with deadly force. With my skill set, I've been given the name Snoop, announced Trevor proudly. I just wanted a name that wasn't Chris Packett, laughed Chris. So what I did was jumble up my name in a different kind of way, take the start and end of bracket, replace the middle bit and the end of Chris, and you get brisket. A bit silly, I know, but it's one of the most popular cuts of beef from Mum and Dad's shop, and I like it. So that's my name, Brisket. Chris then points at the little girl next to him, whose tongue was lolling out the side of her mouth as she concentrated on her colouring in. And this, he continued in a booming voice, is our most important member of all. Putting fear into the hearts of each and every one of our enemies, we have the Shrew. Her real name's Amy, whispered Trevor. Chris needs to look after her while his mum and dad close up the shop. So I suppose that leaves you, said Kazima, turning her attention back to David. And I personally can only think of one name we can give the courageous warrior who is strong and bold enough to pull the legendary pencil from that world-famous bottom. We shall knight you King Arthur the Brave, or just Arthur for short. David couldn't help but laugh. Okay, he said, I'm happy with that. Excellent, said Kazima. Now let me tell you a little bit more about Miss Flegg. And that's the end of chapter 5. I will be back very soon with chapter 6.